Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Byword Show. Today is the day. I'm so glad you guys are here. You guys, we're in for a treat. We've got some more Australian friends with us. Y'all know I love my Australians over here. But we've got Ryan and Calie Bowles from Good Grief HQ with us. And today we're going to be talking about how to talk to our kids about some pretty heavy topics like loss, grief, death, dying. But as we get started, first of all, welcome to the show. I'm so grateful to have you guys here. And would you just kick us off by sharing a little bit about your story and what initially got you passionate about helping Christians find life after loss?
Ooh, what's up, Hannah?
I feel like we need to say g'day, g'day.
We don't say that.
The full experience.
We often do not say that.
That's it. That is a big question you've just landed on us right there. How should we answer that one? Do you want to kick it off or?
Sure. I mean, so we both lost a parent, and it was 7 years before we'd even met or knew about each other. I lost my mum, Ryan lost his dad, and it was within 4 months of each other that they passed. And we've been on this journey for 5 years together now. And we've been together 5 years, married 4. Yeah, we have a business online, helping people with marketing, and just all of a sudden we just didn't feel the purpose in it any longer. And so we're asking God, what's next? And what can we do that will bring us purpose and longevity? It actually was a toilet conversation where the idea came up about what we could do next.
Where all good conversations start. That's what we believe.
In marriages.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, that we just feel God dropped the idea into our spirit, and we were just wondering, what are we good at? What have we been through? What's something that we could help others with? And originally we're like, oh, is marriage something? But we've only been married 3 years. No one's going to listen to us. What else? So we're like, okay, we've both lost a parent. Is that a thing? And then, we looked into it. We're like, can we help people with grief? And yeah, we just did a deep dive literally that day and just found that there was so many people seeking grief support. And so thus it started.
And that was
in a nutshell.
Yeah, and that was June 2023. So to put a date on that, that's when that idea dropped. And so we've just crossed our 50th episode of the podcast. Yeah, we're just about to break 100,000 online for our online community. And so God's just like flung wide these doors. And really, it's a crazy thing to be excited about. But like we wake up and we're excited about the next person that we're going to be able to just speak with, support, help along the journey. And so it's been really beautiful.
That is. And I think it's so cool that you guys saw that need, because I feel like it is such a huge need, especially like having this resource in the Christian world, because, in Christ, we have that hope after life, eternity with Christ, but we don't really talk about that. It's kind of like this weird off limits thing. And I remember when I was in college, I watched this TED Talk. And it was this lady saying that most people don't talk about death or preparing for death or grief or anything like that until they're living in it. So in your experience, I mean, you've heard so many people's stories and you've been through your own grief and loss journey, but what do you wish more Christians understood about death and grief? And then from that, what do you think are some main things that we should be teaching our kids about it?
This is so good. You take me to a conversation I had with my psychologist. And something that we recommend is, seeking professional therapy if you've got the means available. I've dealt with anxiety and depression sort of over the years since I lost my dad. And so not knowing how to put those thoughts in order in my mind, I went and finally sought out a psychologist. And sitting across the chair from him, chatting through some of these things, he actually asked me about marriage, funnily enough, not grief and loss. But he said, what is the goal of marriage, Ryan? I sort of thought about that for a second. I'm like, I don't know. Like, that's not something I've really thought about. He said, well, what do you say in your vows? And we went through it, and you say, until death do us part, right? As part of the vows. Right. And he said, the goal of marriage is actually death. And I was like, now that's a strange concept. I'm like, that's not exactly what I signed up for, on the altar, or put my pen to paper when I had witnesses around me. But that's the goal, that we would live with one another and love one another and support one another until one of us die. Now, that's a crazy concept. When we're in love and love is furious, we're adventuring and so excited. We're not thinking about the death part. We're thinking about all of the good things ahead. And so it just brings me back to this, when you ask about, why don't we talk about these things, or what should we talk about? It's this understanding that death is inevitable for all of us. And we don't think about that in the marriage context, let alone our loved ones. But that's only the first step into eternity, And so I think, first of all, like an understanding that death is a part of life, it's a natural part of life as well. And then also that grief is a natural part of life based on loss. And so some people want to skip through their grief very quickly or push it to one side, but it's actually a natural process that God's given us to wrestle with and to also remember the ones that we've lost. So that's why, our podcast exists, to have those sorts of conversations, because sometimes the ideas seem so simple, but really when you look at them, you go, that's right. We are all going to die. That's a very simple thought, but we don't really spend much time thinking about it because it's a bit morbid, right? It's like,
Right.
you don't want to sit in that chair all day long.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with that, when I was a kid, I experienced a lot of fear around death and dying. And, the first time I experienced any kind of loss was when my uncle passed, my mom's brother. And I think I was like 8 or something. And so I was pretty young. Old enough to kind of understand what was happening, but still it was like the first kind of, whoa, like we have this expiration date and this is kind of scary. And as a kid, I just remember going through this stage where I felt very afraid of something happening to me or something happening to someone in my family. And it can be kind of scary thinking about these things. But how do you guys, when you have these conversations, like kind of peel back all of like the taboo thoughts about it and the fact that it's kind of morbid to think about and the fear, to actually have these conversations to where we can get to a point where we can say, okay, I understand this is a part of life and we don't need to be afraid, but still it is such a huge topic to unpack.
Yeah, I'd like to hear your answer. I thought I would just jump in and just relate to you first of all, Hannah. It's like, before I ever experienced loss, I actually thought about it quite deeply as a young boy. And often I would find, I'd find myself in tears going to sleep, thinking about the loss of my parents, because I just loved them so much. And I thought I was quite abnormal. And I thought, man, this is weird that I would cry for no reason. There's no danger. There is no reason to have any fear. My parents weren't sick or anything like that. But I had that thought. Come, now as we're diving into this, it's actually quite common for kids to have that thought that they might lose parents. And so...
yeah, we've heard it a bunch.
Yeah. And so what I thought was once abnormal was actually quite normal. But there was no language or understanding. And maybe, I would never voice that either, but that was the reality.
Yeah. And for whatever reason, did you have that first thought came up? Like, how do kids get these thoughts if they haven't experienced grief yet? I don't know the answer to that hypothetical question, and our daughter's not at an age where she's talking or, understanding much of what we say.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I imagine we'll just have to start the conversation early about where people go when they die, and that dying is going to happen to all of us. Don't know how we'll quite breach that conversation yet.
The beautiful part about interviewing people on a podcast, as you would know, is you get to learn from others pretty quickly. And so we've been fortunate and blessed to have some of our friends and now friends join us on the podcast that have lost different people, but raising their kids have had to explain some of those circumstances to them. And so I can think of our friend Tilly. She's got 2 young girls, and at different points throughout their journey, they've said, "Mummy, where's your daddy?" And she's on the spot had to think about how she responds to say, "Granddad's not here anymore. He got very sick and he died." Even in that short, simple sentence, explaining to a 3 or a 5-year-old that they got sick and they died, he's not longer here anymore. And then also, based on if you've got a faith or not, explaining that he's with Jesus, or he's in heaven.
He's with the angels and Jesus, yeah.
And so I think very simple language for kids is going to be something that, especially for our kids, we're going to want to use. And then also giving them a very hope-filled idea of what's after death, that he or she is with God, fully healed. They are no longer sick. Simple language like that for kids is really helpful, and the honest truth as well.
Yeah, painting a beautiful picture of heaven so they're not scared of it.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it is so easy to think like, how do I break down this huge concept to something that's tangible for a small child, besides saying that, the dog was sent to the farm or something
Right.
like that, those
Right.
expressions
Yes.
that everyone used to kind of sweeping it over. And then,
Yeah.
when you do face a tragedy or a loss, you can't avoid it anymore. And
Totally.
so, no, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to add to that. It's like this is something that we don't meditate or dwell on enough. So I'll speak for myself. I mean, feel free to include yourselves in this if you feel the same. But if I truly knew heaven held for me, I would want to exit this life immediately. Like if I actually knew what the glory of God and his presence was like, I would want to opt out. So I don't know about you two, but like, thankfully,
Yeah.
thankfully I don't, because that would be bad, but for everyone around me. But that's the honest truth. And so I think, sharing that with kids, as you've asked about like heaven, and what the Bible says about heaven is that there is no weeping, there is no sorrow, there's no pain, sickness, there is joy there. The streets are paved with gold. Like, it is an incredible place. There is singing 24/7. There is no darkness. These are beautiful images of what heaven holds for us, let alone God's presence, which is the ultimate. And so I think
Right.
when we focus our sight on heaven, for me at least, it eases the pain of loss.
Yeah,
And
that's
what
so
was
good.
it that your dad said? Yeah, about the race.
Well, yeah, Dad and I used to talk about, life as a race, and that we were both racing to get to heaven, And so ultimately, he won the race, but way sooner than I would have liked. Yeah, he beat me in the race to eternity.
But I think, yeah, he had a strong sense of heaven and the beauty of getting to heaven. So I think we'll try and instill that in our kids for sure.
Yeah, I love taking that approach because it really emphasizes the hope that we have something to look forward to as believers. All the goodness that we experience doesn't end here after our life on this earth is done. Like, we enter into something that's so much greater. And I think it's so easy to get so caught up in the moment of like, oh, I don't want to die. Like, this is my one chance to have like life and do it all to the full, But when you really look at the scripture, just like you said, Ryan, like, what a beautiful picture is painted for us of what is waiting. And we can rejoice that that's what's coming for us. And it really does like strip away the fear, even though it is a hard thing. Like, no one wants their loved one to go if they got to
No.
choose, right? But I'd love to circle back to your stories and hear about being the one who lost a loved one. What was it like for you holding the tension between, thank you that they're with the Lord, like, thank you, God, that they are with you and we have this hope in Christ, but also this hurts a lot. And now we have this grief journey.
It takes me back to the moment in the hospital. My mum died of cancer. She was in palliative care in her final days. My pastor Sue, she came and she was there in the final hours. I remember having a conversation with her, sitting at the end of the hallway, and because my whole family are believers, and so we were obviously praying for a miracle till the end. I said, Sue, I'm struggling. I don't know whether to let mum go, keep believing and praying for the miracle. And she said, well, can you do both? And I was like, okay, I'll try.
Wow.
And yeah, that was literally in the last hour of mum's life. I realized that not all miracles are earthside. That gave me a good sense of peace where my mum is now, what state she's in, and the glory that she's experiencing. I think her faith, the strength that she had, definitely helped me and my brothers with our grief. I know not all people have that in their loved one who goes, and I'm very, very grateful for that, the faith that she brought to our family and instilled in us kids. And so I definitely think that helped our grief journey. Of course, it was hard and there were moments and it still sucks. And I've recently gone through a different type of grief, being pregnant and then now having our little girl and mum not being here. But yes, I think that her faith definitely helped my grief journey and knowing where she is and what she's experiencing, and that I'll see her again. Yeah.
Well, I think it's good to know because there are people who haven't experienced loss and they just have so much fear about losing a spouse, a child, any loved one. When we do experience loss, it's kind of like we're just tossed in the deep end and just like flailing and figuring it out as we go. And I feel like it's just not, everyone says healing isn't linear. So I'm sure there were so many ups and downs for both of you. And especially, like you mentioned, going through different seasons where it's like, man, I'm sure you wish your mom was there. Just holding that kind of grief in different seasons. Are there things for you in your grief journey that either you wish you would have no, I mean, I don't even know how you can even say how you prepare to grieve. I guess that's not a good way to look at it. But does that make sense? Like how can we
Yeah,
prepare
yeah.
ourselves and then like things you learned on your journey of grieving?
No, I think that's interesting, like preparing to grieve. I think thankfully for things like social media now, we can get so much more like for the good sides of social media, like some of the funny things that, we save are like parent hacks and how to do things better. It's same with grief. Depending on what stage you're at with what you're doing, like if you're about to get married, things can pop up that'll help you towards marriage or there's stuff on faith. So for all of the good elements of social media, it can help us prepare for different phases in life, grief being one of those. The thing about grief, I guess, is that I'll put it this way: if someone's sick, you might have some anticipation that they could pass. And so maybe then you're aware of responding to that situation and thinking about outcomes that could happen. But for the most part, like for my dad, he died suddenly in a plane crash. And so, like people with car crashes that are so frequent, or maybe they die by suicide, freak accidents, for example, you've got no awareness that that could be on your doorstep. And so,
Right.
there really isn't a preparation for that. And you're not really seeking it out because life is great. We're having the best time of our
Yeah.
lives. And so in that circumstance, it's not the easiest. People aren't picking up grief books and just maybe you've got a interest in death and you might. For the most part, you're not preparing. So I can understand that that's where the shock comes from.
Yeah.
But for illnesses, for long-term sicknesses and so forth, maybe you're starting to prepare or think about, but you're also grieving through that process as well. So for Kaylee, and her dad, my father-in-law, I've asked him and we've asked him like, you don't cry much about Claudette, his first wife. And he said, like, I did all of my grieving 7 years prior to her passing because that journey was so hard. And so
Yeah.
that held all of his grief. To answer your question about preparation, I think through like different circles, like in our church at the moment, our good friends and our pastor's brother recently died from an e-bike accident. Tragic, absolutely tragic. No idea that was going to happen. And that ripple effect has affected our whole church community. And so
Wow.
there'd be people, for sure, hundreds of people in our church that have never experienced that form of a loss or any loss in their life, for example, but they've been really moved and touched by the loss of our pastor's brother. And so that has set off a series or a chain reaction of like, wow, maybe I need to think differently about grief and loss, or maybe this will help prepare me. And so I think like there are these secondary effects that help people prepare, and
Yeah.
that happens within family units, social communities, within faith communities, that can really be felt.
I'd like to add to that I think the preparation for grief is not so much preparation, because it's like kind of like motherhood. You can't really prepare. You can just make yourself aware of what to expect, because everyone's journey is different. Everyone's motherhood journey is different. Everyone's grief journey is different. So there can be an array of paths that your journey will take, but just knowing there's many directions that your grief or your motherhood could take, and making
Yeah.
yourself aware, then you're not as blindsided when you're in it. You're like, okay, I heard about this, I read about this, I get it, not just
Yeah.
being so like, oh my gosh, why didn't no one tell me about this, or how did I not know about this? I think any kind of preparation is just being able to find the reality, because I just don't think you can quite prepare, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a good comparison because it's true. Like you can do as much as you can to learn and prepare yourself, but then it's like you just never know until you're in it. And I think it's really interesting also that you had two experiences where, Ryan, you experienced a sudden loss, and Kaylee, yours was more of a gradual kind of going through this process with your mom. And even kind of coming back to what you said earlier, like it'll pop up in different seasons and grief may look different around. I know you guys have talked about like around the holidays, around anniversaries and things like that. Like it can just change and ebb and flow. So for you guys, what have you found to be some like helpful tools or resources that have helped you in the hard moments of your grief?
Great question. as part of how we support people, we talk about what we call our good grief model. And there are sort of three core elements to the model that make up really processing grief, and on the other end of that, finding peace and purpose again. One of those elements, listeners can think about a triangle. It's a nice, easy way to think about this model. And if peace and purpose is the goal that we're aiming for after a loss, to find that place where we can breathe, we can look forward to the day ahead, or maybe a holiday again, or grandkids coming into the world, those types of things. That's what peace and purpose might look like. The three elements that surround the triangle, first and foremost, building a positive mind again, because that just gets shattered completely, as you know as well, going through your losses. The second part is a healthy body, because that's one of the things that we neglect when we go through grief. We all know what that looks like. It might be a bit too much alcohol, it's very little sleep, poor diet, maybe it's sugar, etc. And then the third thing is a connected spirit. And so these three areas, I guess the foundation that we want to focus on after grief when it comes to, and they can happen in any order. Like you said, grief isn't linear. So it's not 1 through 11. These things pop up depending on where you're at. And so when it comes to a positive mind, we really need coping strategies and tools that can help us regulate. They might be different forms of breath work or meditation or journaling, different ways that we can just self-regulate and get ourselves back into a state where we can take another step forward. We need to focus on emotional resilience and building mental wellness as well. When it comes to a healthy body, we need movement in our lives, good nutrition, and then we need to focus on our sleep and our rest. And then finally, for a connected spirit, that looks like really making sure that we build a solid, supportive community around us. And then also family, maybe we have to restore some of what family looks like. And then finally, it's God and faith and our relationship there as well. And so those sort of areas around those three cores are what help us get back to finding meaning again, finding hope in our life, and having a sense of, which might be really hard to hear for some people, excitement or an anticipation about the future again. Like I said, they don't happen linearly, if I can say that right, but they are the building blocks towards getting back to finding peace and purpose again in life.
That's so good. I love that, because it is so hard when you have experienced a loss to imagine life on the other side. I've heard people talk about how when they experience a loss, there's life before that. And then that moment marks a point where it's now I'm living in life after that person, after that event, after that moment. And it can be so hard when you're grieving to even see past where you're at. Are there things that you've noticed, like maybe you've talked to people in your community, things that like keep us stuck in grief, unable to move forward, that we need to watch out for?
Yeah, absolutely. Really talking is one of the greatest gifts that we've got, to share what's really on our mind and on our heart. And so at first that can be so difficult and so vulnerable. And sometimes that gets blocked because maybe someone has shared something that's felt quite offensive, and therefore we close up and we shut down. But there's a thought that says problem shared is a problem halved. And I like to add on to the end of that as long as we're sharing it with the right person. And so knowing the people around you that you have that you can trust, that might be family, it might not be family. In some cases, family gets disintegrated, through loss.
Yeah.
They don't quite understand. But having a trusted friend, and it only needs to be one, that can really help you carry the weight of some of that grief. For me, one of my best friends, Simon, he's got a different way of doing things, and he's never experienced loss like we're talking about here. And so he is so optimistic and full of joy. But he knew what I needed despite not going through it. And sometimes that was a kick up the butt and saying, let's get out and let's move, and he knew that I needed that. And I'm grateful for it. Sometimes it was just a gentle hug and just driving silently in the car. But having someone to share with, really, really crucial.
Yeah, 100%. I think if I was to jump back to the preparation question, if you can prepare yourself with a community around you who will support you no matter what and will be a listening ear, that's invaluable. Because a lot of the time people get to the grief journey and then people leave and people get awkward and they lose friendships left, right, and center, and they're wondering what's going on. People just sometimes don't know how to deal with other people's grief.
Oftentimes.
Yeah, often. Sorry, very often.
Yeah.
So if you start that conversation in your community, in your friendship groups, your family, so that if any one of you were to experience grief, you'd be there for each other, whether you have experienced it or not. But if you could just be a listening ear, no one needs to try and help someone's or fix someone's grief. You don't need to do that. You just need to listen. And so often people don't realize that. They're like, oh no, I can't help them. But you don't need to help them. You just need to listen. So people do get stuck with that for sure.
Yep. I think that's such a good point. And I'm glad that you brought up having someone to be there for you, because I was going to ask you about what it looks like to be on the other side if you are walking with someone through grief, because now you guys have, this community of people who are talking about this on a regular basis, and you're kind of the guides now on this journey of other people's grief. What are some things that you've noticed just since now using your experience and walking with other people on this journey?
So much.
We've put together a whole support guide on
Yeah.
this.
I think, if you've got, and I'd call it a honor to walk with somebody through grief, it really is. It's an opportunity to love and to just be there for them. But then some practical things that can really be helpful, making decisions really easy for that person who's grieving. And so when you end up in grief, decision making, like that just goes out the window. You just want to sleep all day. It's hard to think about, is it the right time to eat? Should I be eating it? And then you got to look after maybe kids, or you still got to work. There's all these things going on. And so if you're supporting someone through grief, some simple ways that you can do that is just by saying, if it were you, Hannah, I'd say, I might just send you a simple text that says, Hannah, like thinking of you, what night would be better? I'll bring around dinner, Monday or Tuesday. Really simple. Then all you've got to decide is Monday is better. Or maybe it's like, hey, what day this week would be helpful? I'll come around, do all your washing, clean the house for you. Or maybe it's like, I'll just take out your 2 kids for 3 hours on Saturday so you can have some time to go for a walk or have a long shower, or whatever that might look like in your spare time. Some of those are really practical things that you can, especially if you're supporting and you feel like, I'm really bad with words, and just being a practical person like that can be really helpful. Some things that you can say that are quite helpful are, you might just say, hey, I'm thinking of you. Let me know if you want to go for a walk, and we'll go for a walk, or grab a coffee and I'll take you out for a coffee. And then that way you can just walk alongside them. You can sit with them. You don't have to say anything either. You can just be a listening ear.
Yeah, I think some people just want someone in the house. If they live alone, the silence can be
deafening.
Deafening, disturbing. And so just saying, hey, when can I come over and just be company? Groceries are also just a good practical way to help support someone who's in grief. They might not want to go to the shops. That might trigger them. Going to the supermarket or being around restaurants or places where their loved one was with them.
Gift cards. So things like fuel gift cards, Uber vouchers.
Uber Eats,
Yeah. Really simple ways that people can just use them without thinking too much. I know just after having our baby, we got Uber gift cards, and honestly, it was so helpful.
Oh it's the best.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would send flowers, and as beautiful as flowers are, we're putting it out there to our audience.
They die.
They die.
All right.
They die very quickly. Yeah. And often you get a lot of them. And
they smell. And then they smell bad when they die.
They smell good and then they smell bad.
So true.
But this is
you have to deal with them.
It's a very potent reminder that I've just lost someone, and now I'm losing something else, and I've got to clean up the mess.
Yeah. And so we just tell everyone, why not send the money instead? Because that would be more useful.
Yeah. And you know what? This is so helpful, because I'm sorry, you guys, I kind of got off track, but I know we're supposed to be having this conversation in the context of talking to our kids.
This
but
is great.
I'm just enjoying myself here. I'm loving this. But I think it's so great too, even just that idea of how to walk with someone through that, because I'm just thinking to myself, if we have a friend who's grieving, and as a family, we show up to love and support those people, then our kids just kind of watch that interaction of us coming around as support and community. It kind of it gives that opportunity for conversation as our kids have questions, and even the talking piece, as much or as little as our kids may understand at different stages about dying and grief, opening up space to have that conversation, I'm sure is huge in itself. Because the last thing I feel like was helpful when I was a kid and afraid of dying was just having that conversation shut down and just, well, you're fine. Don't be afraid. It's okay. Are there people in your community or people you've talked to who have kids or have walked with grief, and they've tried to explain what's going on to their littles?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, there's so many people that pop to mind. Yeah, we mentioned Tilly. We've also got our friend Casey Barros, and again, she's got 2 young kids as well. She also lost her dad, and so walking them through the process. Her dad died in hospice. And so those final stages, her kids were there in the other room as he passed. They were in and around those final scenes. And then I remember he'd been taken out of the room, I believe, and sort of they came in, they said, oh, well, where is he? And what she'd done is actually she'd opened the window of the room and said, he's gone, his spirit's left and he's gone to be with the angels. And they used that physical representation of the window as him leaving to go up into heaven. I thought that was really special. So yeah, I mean, plenty of people we've had the opportunity to talk to that have sort of walked their kids through that. Our friend over in the States, Pastor Justin, has got quite a number of kids. And when his wife passed, they'd all been, sleeping with other family members all in their home. And I felt or heard a knock at the door and all his kids' heads popped through the door and said, Dad, are you all right? We're worried about you. And so he invited them in, and walking kids through those journeys has been a bit of a theme, on our podcast. And I can only imagine, based on hearing these stories, just how precious those moments are with your kids, to help them understand and to walk with them through that. Yeah, it's a very powerful thing.
Even for us, our journey, it looked different because we went through miscarriage, but we already had our son at the time. And so even though he was little and he didn't really understand what was going on, there was just something about him watching us grieve, like watching me. I mean, I had a lot of hard days, just so many times where I was like, I can't even begin to explain this to him. But he just had this tenderness about him. Like, he was sensitive to what was going on. And you're so right. Like, kids really do pick up on a lot. And I think that's something for me in my own grief journey with that specifically, was just realizing, wow, like sometimes I just need to sit here and feel it and do nothing. Like I sometimes think like my healing needs to be productive. Like I should be further along by now. I should be through this. We just let that be a slow season. And it was so cool, like seeing our son respond to that, because sometimes he'd be like, are you sad, mommy? And I would just be like, oh, yes, I am sad today. Or no, you know what? Mommy's not that sad today. And like, just even talking on his level about those things was a really cool experience, because I just see how even now as he's gotten older and we're on the other side of that now and we have our daughter, it's just very sweet to see how much they pick up on. It almost to me is also like this check, because I'm like, oh man, he can tell also if I'm not, like if I'm avoiding processing my feelings, that kind of thing. So it's just interesting how grief, I feel like, has to be felt to be healed, and as adults, we get so tempted, or at least I do, get so tempted to just shut it out, just move on from it. I don't know. When you were telling me about those stories with the littles, it just made me realize, man, a part of this is kind of like childlike faith in healing our grief, remembering the hope we have in Jesus, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And you actually mentioned something there really important about, like, because I resonate. You're like, I want to be productive in my grief. I'm the kind of personality, I want to be productive on a Saturday and a Sunday, not just, that's how I think all the time. And so we do think about our grief like, oh, how can I continue to be moving through? Something that's helped my understanding of grief as I've gone along now for 12 years is that this grief is going to be with me forever. When I first lost Dad, I thought that, wow, this is going to be hard for a time, but, like hopefully there's like another stage, right? Yes, there are stages, but the grief doesn't go away. We grow with it. And C.S. Lewis puts it this way. He says that grief became a close companion. And maybe he was referencing Jesus, who in Isaiah is known or is mentioned as a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, which means close friends with grief. And so understanding that the grief won't go away, and we were actually talking about it just last week, is that I'm actually fearful of a day that my grief would leave me completely, because it would mean that I no longer am touched by the relationship or the closeness or the love that I shared with my dad. And that would be a tragic day. So I want my grief to stay with me, but how that looks and how that plays out in my day-to-day life, I'm open for that changing.
That's such a good point. And I think it is something that is hard to come to terms with. It's like, oh, I mean, I relate to you. I'm very much like, oh, I just want to be past this. I want to be over it. I want to move on. But it comes in waves, and it's okay. And I think that's something that I wish I had understood earlier in life, I mean, with a lot of things as far as emotional and spiritual healing, but like just being okay with it being a process because
Yeah,
there's so much opportunity in that to grow closer and lean on the Lord through our grief and through our healing. And that's why I love how even when we started, like opening up this conversation is like we as believers, this is such a unique experience of grief when we experience loss and dying because it's just like a transition into something better. It's so easy to forget that when we're in the ache of the loss, right?
Yeah.
100%, 100%. If I can just add one more thing, like that I think about often, and this revelation has only just come maybe in the last like 6 to 8 months, where Jesus loses his good friend Lazarus, and
Mm,
we know the story of Lazarus, where he prays and Lazarus comes out of the tomb, but before that it says Jesus wept, and the shortest scripture in the Bible, 2 words, Jesus wept. When I think about that, and theologians think about this differently. I don't want to get too theological here, but my simplistic view is that he wasn't weeping because, I mean, partly he was weeping because his good friend died and he could feel and sense everybody's sorrow and grief and loss. But I believe he was weeping because he knew that Lazarus had ascended to heaven, was experiencing the glory of God, and by raising him from the dead, he was actually pulling him from heaven back to earth, knowing that
wow.
Lazarus would have to die a second time. And that's what grieved Jesus. And so, coming back to that conversation around heaven, I wanted to pull my dad down from heaven. That was my prayer. Like, if I could, I would bring him back. But realizing that, wow, what a sad day that would be for him to have to suffer death a second time when he's already experiencing the glory. And so that really shaped my perception.
Man, it's just so interesting. Like this really isn't something that I ever talk about. And I feel
Right.
like most believers don't. But when you really do think about that, it's like, wow, no wonder. I mean, Jesus knows what's to come. And it's like, oh, like you were saying earlier, Ryan, it's like, who wouldn't want that? Like, why would we be so fearful of what's to come? Obviously, like death itself is something that I'm sure is like enjoyable. But like
For
when
sure.
we think about what's on the other side of that, like, wow, we can just have so much hope. So I think it's so fantastic that you guys have just created this safe space for people to come and heal and ask questions and find community and resources. Because I feel like as a church, man, if we got a real understanding of what was to come for us, it would change everything.
100%.
You're so right.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
could do better.
Yeah. Well, I just appreciate you guys so much for even facilitating these conversations. I would love to know before you go, is there any other advice or encouragement you want to leave with the parents who are listening?
Whoa, so good.
I think just keeping it simple and keeping it real. Kids are sponges, and they take in a lot, and they do as we do, right? So if you can not, if you're going through grief yourself, just not bottle it up, but be real with them and be honest with them and explain to them. I think, yeah, they'll be better off. And if they see you being, like your poster says in the background, being a kind human to someone else who's grieving and supporting others, they will learn to do that also, and they'll learn how to support others through grief.
I love that.
Yeah, I just reflect on the Psalms, which says the Lord is near to the brokenhearted. And I know that's carried me through a lot of seasons. And yeah, our prayer is that people would find that nearness in their grief with the Lord.
Yeah, that's so good. There's just so much to this huge topic to unpack. But the
Totally.
good news
You've
is,
done
for
well.
those of you who are listening, you can go and connect with Ryan and Calie. They've got so many more resources. So will you guys tell them where they can connect with you, listen to your podcast, find all the things?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity too,
Yeah,
Hannah.
thank
It's
you.
been awesome hanging out. For everybody that wants to come and hang out with us, Instagram is a great spot to start. So you can find us at Good Grief HQ. Pretty much daily resources there, videos, there's tools and tips and ways that you can process, also connect further with us. So come hang out with us on Instagram.
Absolutely. I'll make sure that's linked for you guys. I am just so grateful for you guys having these conversations and just for using your own experience and the grief that you currently carry with you in different seasons of life to encourage so many other believers with the hope that we have in Jesus. So thank you guys so much for joining us and being a part of this conversation in this series.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, Hannah. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to tune in to another episode of the Byword Show. I love having you here, and your support truly means the world to me. If you enjoyed this episode, would you leave a quick review? It really helps our community grow and reach more women. If you want more, you can shop my books Waking Up, Living Open, and Love Is on Amazon, and be sure to sign up for my email list so you always get the latest news. I can't wait to chat again soon, but in the meantime, be sure to come hang out with me on social media, and remember, I'm cheering you on.